Good evening and welcome to the Thursday edition of Live at Grange. This evening I will be joined by a panel of speakers who will look at the role of grassland on Irish beef farms. How can we grow more and what do we need to do at farm level to improve utilisation? We look forward to engaging with you for the next hour. Good evening and welcome to the Thursday edition of Live at Grange. Our broadcast this evening has been brought to you in conjunction with Agriland and has been kindly sponsored by FBD. The theme of tonight's discussion is growing more grass on my farm, and I'm delighted to be joined by our panel of speakers tonight. Firstly, Suckler farmer, farm manager Sean Roddy, who manages the Lyons Demesne estate in County Kildare. A colleague, Christy Watson, who's our B&T dry stock advisor and works out of our Naas office, and another colleague, Dr. Ed O'Riordan, who is one of the main beef researchers here in Teagasc Grange. As our broadcast is live and interactive, we'd like you to encourage you as viewers to maybe send in your questions, and you can see now along the bottom of your screen that you can text Teagasc at 51444, or if you wish you can use hashtag #VirtualBeefWeek. On the way down today, when I was actually preparing for this talk and discussion, I was thinking about grassland, and you know, I had to travel through 5 different counties, and a couple of thoughts occurred to me. The first one was that every county, every townland, every parish that I drove through, all had the ability to grow grass. And the second thought that came to me was that grass was being managed and often undermanaged on a number of the beef farms that I drove past on the way down. So it is a resource that we can grow in this country, but it's certainly been underutilised. So the purpose of tonight's discussion is to look at how can we grow more grass, how can we better utilise that grass, and what are the key management tips with regard to spring management, summer management, and autumn management at farm level. So with that, we sent the cameras down last week to Sean's farm in County Kildare, and we tackled and looked at the issue and asked him how was he tackling the issue of soil fertility.
The most fundamental and first step to take in tackling or in building our P and K levels on farm is to have our nutrient management plan completed on a yearly basis. So that's done every early spring with our Teagasc advisor. My approach with soil fertility starts with a soil test. When I first came here 3 years ago, the first thing we undertook was to do a full soil test across the whole farm to identify where our soil nutrient levels lie and to be able to pull together a plan to start tackling our most limiting factors. At the get-go, we have relatively low soil fertility here on the farm, but the most limiting factor and the most cost-effective thing to tackle first was the pH of the soils. So we started off with spreading lime, and we have probably spread over 190 tonne of lime to date over the last 3 years. I've seen significant improvements since starting the liming program. The most noticeable thing is when I first go out with application of nitrogen or my P's and K's. Before, with lower pHs, the response was just that little bit slower. I would get a response, but I can definitely see the difference, and particularly see the difference in growth rates, early growth rates from applications of fertilizers after spreading lime. Building P and K on farm, we're pretty much in index 1s and 2s for both across the farm, and it is a difficult task to do, particularly with low cash flows at present on the farm, but I suppose we're targeting little and often with P's and K's to ensure that the grass has what it needs. And then to add to that as well, I've undertaken the P allocation course to give myself extra P allocation to help build P. And I've also got the opportunity to import some dairy slurry locally that will allow me then to build my P's and K's in a little bit more of a cost-effective manner. Priority would be given to silage fields for raising the indexes for P and K first. generally because this is where the silage is coming off, so that's where the slurry needs to go back on. I get the most response as well from building those indexes on the silage first and foremost, and then as money allows, we'll build P&K in the grassland. And if we take surplus silage off our grazing ground, we will go out with slurry after that as well to replenish any nutrients that we're taking off. Silage production on farm, I have two separate systems for silage production here on farm. I have your more traditional grass silage based systems which would be targeted towards my suckler cows, and then I have red clover silage ground which will be targeted towards my young stock. For the grass silage, we are looking at 100 units of nitrogen, 20 units of P and 100 units of K applied before first cut. That's an amalgamation of cattle slurry, 0730 and protected urea plus sulphur to build up to our requirements. And then on the red clover silage ground, we're just going with our cattle slurry to back onto the ground after each cut to maintain and build the soil fertility in those. So there's no nitrogen applied to those at all.
Okay, so you'll get some indication there from the video that we're after seeing of how Sean is going about tackling soil fertility. I'll move maybe to Sean now, and basically Sean, very impressive looking farm I have to say. From your own perspective, would you give us a bit more insight into the type of system that you're operating down there, and maybe describe to the audience what is unique about what you're doing on the farm, particularly in relation to the emphasis you put on grass?
Yeah, so the farm itself, we run a 100% spring calving herd. Cows calve, and from about 2 days after calving, they'll be out on grass. And the aim of that is that once they're out on grass, it's pedal to the floor, flat out. We want them cattle growing, and we're aiming to try and finish our progeny off grass on their second season at grass at about 18 to 22 months of age. Carcass ranges between 300 to 340. So grass is the fundamental part of that. We want animals growing right through the whole time on the farm. So high quality 80 DMD silage during the winter, high quality grass during the summertime, and we want to eliminate meal from the finishing period as much as we can.
You're not feeding meal either to finishing animals or to weanlings?
No meal. The only time meal would come in is if we have a grass deficit that we need to keep animal performance moving. But if I can make high quality silage and manage the quality of my grass, then there's no issue with cattle being able to finish off grass.
Okay, certainly fairly impressive. There's not too many farms, I don't think, that would be finishing without some level of concentrate feeding at farm level. Eddie, I'll move to you next. One of the features that was very evident in the video was that Sean talked about he's in the farm for the last 3 years. He's started off by doing a level of soil testing. And one of the areas that he honed in on was the actual usage of lime. You know, what is your experience with regard to the whole area of soil testing coming from the research side and the use of lime and sort of building soil pH?
Certainly, anybody who's going to embark on trying to improve the output from their farm has to start with the soil. And I think the basic building block has to be lime first and foremost. You know, really, you wouldn't build a house without a building having a foundation. Lime is the foundation for any productive land. So whether it's grassland, grass per se, or clover, or whatever crop you're growing, lime is essential. To me, any farmer who's trying to expand and grow and work the enterprise, having soil tests done is hugely important, because in that regard, knowledge is king in some ways. So if you have a soil test done, you can correct the pH, and as Sean already referred to, you can begin to target parts of the farm that need to be targeted for P and K. So specifically, certainly soil testing is an absolute must. You have to know what's in the soil, But also by applying lime, it does mean that the efficiency which other nutrients are used, the P and the K, are also more efficient, are better, response are better and more efficiently used. So it's essential and key.
And Sean, you said in the video that you put out about 190 tonnes of lime there. I mean, have you seen the benefit of that?
Yeah, definitely. Like from my first year there, you know, we would have started off with not every field getting its lime allocation. We would have spread throughout the year. The differences in those paddocks that received lime and then got their fertilizer application, they kicked on that little bit quicker, yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, it's very obvious from what you're saying, Eddie, soil test, correct pH, those are the one of the first two steps that you might take in terms of trying to address the issue of growing more grass. Christy, as an advisor on the ground, you're getting in lots of soil samples. You've done nutrient management plan here with Sean and worked through that with him. One of the things that has become blatantly obvious is that a lot of Irish dry stock farms are low in P and K. And granted, you know, they're only operating at a much lower stocking rate than Sean. P and K is expensive. If you go out onto a farm that's moderately stocked, I mean, how do you advise them with regard to getting P and K out? What areas of the farm might you target in order to get them the best sort of response for maybe what is a limited budget?
Just to reinforce what Eddie said there, Aidan, yeah, the first priority would be, you know, lime, if there's a lime issue on the farm, to correct the soil pH. The second thing is, I suppose we must bear in mind that there isn't an unlimited amount of money available on dry stock farms, particularly in this climate. So what you're looking to get is the best return of the amount of limited resources that are there. So I would look at the farm, and invariably the first thing you would look at is the farm growing enough grass at the moment? Can we displace some other cost? We'll say shorten the winter period by getting better grass growth in the spring. That will involve then targeting the fields that you turn out first to in the spring to address some of the P and K issues there. Secondly, we would look at, and primarily, the silage fields. Invariably, when you look at the soil test results, you can pick out the fields that have been repeatedly cut for silage. They'll generally be low in potassium. And irregardless of the stocking rate, all dry stock farmers, or indeed dairy farmers, require maximum yields in the shortest period of time so that you get an acceptable yield with very good quality. So you're working, you know, you work around the budget that the farmer has to spend. You know, we said we don't be put off by when we look at the results and find a major deficit all over the farm. You know, we're not going to be looking to get people to correct that deficit across all of the farm. So we target the expenditure where you get best return. Silage fields, number one. Can you displace concentrate use maybe by getting better growth rate in the spring, shorten the winter period? Perhaps, you know, if there's a land being rented, for instance, and the stocking rate cannot justify that, perhaps we can look at it and see, well, some of the money that would be spent on rented land, you know, and at the end of the day, dry stock farmers can rent up to 13% of the area they farm. So we might be looking at maybe taking some of the money that's used for renting land and investing it on the home farm, because invariably the land you're going to be renting in is going to be very deficient in soil fertility anyway, so you're facing an uphill battle. So the investment at home and the targeted investment at home. So we might, at the end of the day, at that end of that conversation, we mightn't necessarily be spending any more money than was being spent on fertiliser prior to that, but with the benefit of the soil test results, we can target the expenditure in the areas where the maximum return can be got.
One of the things that I took from the video from Sean, and he mentioned about the application rate or fertiliser application rate for first cut silage, he used the equivalent of 100 units of nitrogen, 20 of P and 100 of K. To me, that's where we need to be at with regard to fertilising first cuts. What is the reality, or where are farmers falling short on the ground from your experience?
Okay, I think the first thing, Aidan, that 100 of N and 20 of P and 100 of potassium, you know, the first source of that should be the slurry that was generated. The cattle slurry has been generated off the silage fields and needs to go back onto the silage fields. And Sean is doing that. He's putting his slurry back in the silage fields, deducting the nutrients in the applied slurry and putting the balance out in chemical fertiliser. So I think that's priority number one. The other thing that maybe has crept in, and I'm not sure why that has happened over the last number of years, maybe a drop in the amount of nitrogen that's being used for first cut. You know, a total of maybe 100 units, 90 to 100 units per acre, made up of chemical and organic sources. But you know, what will happen there is, you know, if you drop the nitrogen usage by 20%, you'll drop the yield by an equivalent amount. And if you wait then to try and get your full yield, you'll end up cutting maybe 2 weeks later. You're suffering a quality issue there. You're going to drop the quality of the silage, and that's going to increase your winter feeding costs the following winter. So we need to go back to basics. You know, it's 100 of nitrogen thereabouts, and maybe 20p and 100 of K, and plus sulfur. So there has been a move away to be some people applying less nitrogen than is required.
Yeah, and there seems, you know, you get the impression there that at farm level there is a fear that, you know, high nitrates in grass silage is going to cause a problem as such. Listen, there's a few other areas obviously that I want to touch on as we go through the talk and go through our discussion. But again, last week, while the cameras were down with Sean in Kildare, we talked to him specifically about what has he done on the farm in order to improve grazing infrastructure. So we'll cut to that now.
So infrastructure on the farm started off here with just 11 fields. We started off by dividing these fields down into 17 paddocks. So all paddocks were fenced permanently with electric fencing. And these paddocks then can be broken down into 45 breaks using temporary reels. The most important part of the whole system is probably the location of the water troughs. When I first came here, every water trough was located in the corner of the field, and we had very poor water pressure. So I invested in relocating a lot of water troughs. So every water trough now services at least 2 paddocks. Some water troughs can service up to 4 temporary paddocks, and we invested in a new water system, so we've increased the water pressure and the amount of water that we can get to the animals. With using temporary reels, it allows me to keep the cost of the fencing infrastructure down while also maintaining the size of my field. So if I'm looking at silage and I'm able to open up a field and take a large cut of silage, for every group of animals, I'm looking at 3 reels and 30 standards, 10 standards with each reel. So for 50 cows and 50 calves, the grazing area allocated to one group would be 13 hectares. Each temporary paddock of is a hectare in size, and each hectare does 2 days. So we're roughly working around 3 weeks rest for each paddock before the cattle are going back onto that paddock again to graze. The advantages of using the paddock-based system with temporary reels and standards and electric fences over and above just growing extra grass and utilising extra grass is the management ability it gives me around working with the cattle. I have animals that are easier to handle. I can move any group of animals from any paddock on the farm to any other paddock on the farm just myself. Cows are more docile. They move a lot easier for me. They're used to being moved every 2 days. So one person, which is generally me, can move any group of animals from any paddock on the farm to any other paddock on the farm without any need for assistance. When we take them into the cattle yards, they tend to be easier to handle because, again, they're used to being handled. When they're being moved into fresh breaks on a regular basis, it's quite easy to pick up on poorer performing animals or animals that are maybe coming lame, and because they will generally be the last animal through the gate or the last animal to cross the fence line. Other benefits then is around grass utilization. I run a 3-reel system, so I have a back reel, a forward reel and a tomorrow reel, and all I have to do is wind up the reel in front of them. That gives them their next break, and then the paddock break that becomes their back fence, and the fence that was behind them can go up in front of them again for 2 days' time. And all of that is protecting regrowths and utilising as much of the time that grass has, because it will use the most amount of energy in those 2 to 3 days after it's just grazed off. So I want to protect that as much as I possibly can.
Look, as the video demonstrated, it's always great to see a farm that it's paddocked and well managed and showing high quality grass available to stock, and you can see it in the stock there. Eddie, you've been involved in research in Grange for quite a while now, and Teagasc have always been pushed the idea of paddocks rotational grazing, and we've been doing it for a good few years. I mean, what are the advantages if someone would move from set stocking towards a paddock or a rotational grazing system?
I think, Aidan, the biggest advantage is around how you can manage grass and manage the stock. There's no doubt that if you want to, and we know that grass growth varies throughout the season, so if you're on one block of land, it becomes impossible to manage that. If you take that farmer and divide it into fields, or into paddocks, be it 5, 6, 7, 10, that number doesn't matter right now. It means that once you have paddocks, even if the same amount of grass grows, it means that you can see it much more easily. You can see surpluses building up. And I think, to me, the key to managing grass is to be able to, obviously, to match animal demand with supply. That's what it's all about. But when you have a paddock system in place, it means the variable grass growth that takes place, you're able to see it and manage it. It means you can see throughout the paddocks where they are. You might want them to have like the steps of the stairs in terms of a feed wedge, so you know the paddock that's strongest you go into the next time, and so on, so on. So it gives you tremendous ability to manage grass. And in course, in the video we've just seen, Sean made a point as well, that in terms of managing stock, you're with stock every day, you're moving stock every 2, every 3 days, and the way stock respond to that in terms of docility and quietness is actually another bonus. But to me, the main issue with paddocks is, the main benefit is managing grass.
Yeah, good point. And I mean, I was delighted that Sean actually brought up the point in terms of what it does with regard to, quietening stock, using it as a tool, to look at the health of the stock when he's out herding every day. That can't be emphasised. And, from a part-time farmer point of view, that has to be a major plus, where stock will literally follow you from paddock to paddock, as opposed to you looking to maybe drive stock. Sean, one of the things, and I've been involved with the Better Farm programme over the years, and one of the things that we set out in that programme was we wanted fellas to become very good grassland managers. And one of the things that we looked for them to do was to measure grass. Now, I realise that your stocking rate, it's important that you measure grass maybe compared to some other farms, but, what motivates you to go out on a weekly basis to measure grass? I take it you're using pasture base?
Yeah.
And the reason I'm asking that is we've seen lads over the years fall off the wagon when it comes to actually measuring. So what motivates you? What gets you out on a Monday morning to say, I'm walking the farm, I'm going to take covers?
So apart from just getting a good 13-kilometre walk in, it's a great it allows me to make decisions. It's probably, at my stocking rate, it's the most important 2 hours that I can spend on the farm that week, because looking at the week ahead, it makes all my decisions for me based off the information I gather. Whether am I cutting silage this week? Am I needing to speed up my round, slow down my round, go in with fertilizer, go out with slurry? What are my decisions? What management decisions am I going to make this week, or do I need to make this week? They're all made on the grass walk.
So essentially what I call it, the walk plus pasture base are giving you the confidence to make these decisions that you know that you can basically stand over.
Yeah, so it's information. You can't make a decision if you don't have the information. And having that information means that you can make a more reliable decision, and you have a higher chance of making the right decision.
Okay. Christy, I come into you tomorrow morning. I tell you I have a block of 40 acres available. It's basically been managed in such a way at the moment that's been set stock. I maybe haven't got the budget that was available to Sean in order to put in the paddocks that he has in the water system or whatever. I mean, if a client presents themselves with that and you're trying to get them to use grass that wee bit better, what are the key couple of things that you would advise him or her with regard to what they need to do to improve the sort of grazing infrastructure that ultimately will give them better grass utilisation?
I suppose the first thing in is that, if there are large fields there, you'd have to try and sort of break that down into smaller areas. I would suggest a small step, maybe to paddock up with temporary reels, as Sean has done, maybe half of that area, say 20 acres of land. So the advantage there is, okay, it's a decision made, but it's not a permanent decision. If somebody is not happy with it, and you've yet to come across a farmer who puts in paddocks and who reversed out and decided that they weren't for them. So, a small investment, maybe 2 water troughs, buy a couple of reels, you're set up with very small investment. And the farmer will see there as time goes on. So that's the first big decision you make, which is not really a big one. But if you think about it, and as Eddie pointed out earlier, trying to manage grass later, once you divide the area up into smaller sections, it's like a game of chess. Every move is a small move. So if you decide to make a decision to take out a paddock, you're only taking out maybe 1 hectare or half a hectare, as opposed to having to take out half a field, maybe half of that area, 8 hectares. So the subsequent decisions thereafter are all small decisions. And when you're moving your stock around from, that you're getting your walk in like Sean. If you're moving every 2 days, you know, you're out there 3 to 4 times a week moving the stock around, so you can see how grass is growing. So I think, you know, to go down the paddock route, you can go down there very cheaply, very simply, and it's a reversible decision if you're not happy with it. Or if you want to decide to take silage out of that field later, you just take up your reels, you move on.
For the average stock farm, for example, that may not be just fully set up in terms of being able to do a grass walk every week in terms of the actual measurement. I mean, how important is it, Christy, that we just encourage people to get out there and to walk the grazing block, you know, with maybe not have to record the actual covers, but just to get out there to see what way things are growing, to see what's happening ahead of the cattle or whatever?
Yeah, I think there's only 2 things really you need to appreciate when you're going around there. Number one is the paddock grazed out, and we've seen on Sean's video there what 4 centimetres is. So at what stage should you go in, at what stage should you leave the paddock, and what stage then should you leave that paddock and move on and maybe take it out for hair silage? So they're all small, minute decisions, but you're out there 3 days a week, very minimum, and you can get a very clear picture of the way grass is growing. If that field is left in maybe 2 or 3 or 4 fields, you're walking in 3 or 4 fields. You don't generally, if they're set stocked, you don't see any variation within the field. Whereas if you have it in partitioned like a chessboard, as I say, you will see the black and the white, you'll see it grazed out, you'll see the paddocks that are getting a bit strong, and you can make a decision then to leave those out. And again, as I say, it's not something that you can't change later on. You know, you can go in and you can decide to do a permanent situation or a permanent paddock system later on. But you know, as Sean has gone up with big numbers in his divisions through the use of reels and temporary fences there.
And Eddie, just to go back a wee bit on the research side, I mean, Sean mentioned that he had 1 hectare paddocks and they were lasting approximately 2 days. Is there any sort of optimum size paddock? You know, should we be looking to move stock every day, every 2 days, every 3 days? You know, what advice would you give farmers there?
To me, the simplest way to look at it is, you know, whatever number of fields you have, the more you can divide, the better in some ways. But let's cut to the chase and say, if someone told me I have a paddock for 3 days and I have 7 of them or 8 of them, I'd say good luck to you. You use those paddocks to the best of your ability, and if you want to subdivide, as Christy said, with a simple reel, with the trough apparently in the right place, that's what you do. I mean, let's not overcomplicate this. It should be a simple thing. It's the same for the measurements. If people might shy away from having the plate meter, initially let's walk it, call it a number, say what your suggested cover is. The most important thing is that you go week after week, or indeed several times a week when you're moving cattle, to see what's on the ground. Is there more grass there now than there was yesterday? And if there is, it's going ahead of you. If there's less grass, you need to make some decisions. So let's not complicate it. To me, grassland management, particularly for rotational grazing, is a very simple technique and tool to have.
Okay, and I think, you know, the point that you made, Sean, was a very relevant one there in your video. I mean, you're grazing in such a way and you were in the paddock and out of the paddock in sufficient time that you were able to protect that initial regrowth, which kept you on track with your 21-day or whatever rotation length you were tending to work on. Okay, so we'll move now to our third video, and the third video basically is looking at the management required at the 3 critical periods throughout the grass year: spring management, mid-season management, and closing up in autumn management. So we'll move to the video again down on Sean's farm.
Spring grassland management on the farm here is all focused around turnout date. So calving on farm, the target calving, started calving is the 1st of March. The rationale behind that is that this allows me to turn cattle straight out after the calving. This minimises the amount of high quality silage I need. If I calve cows any earlier, they'll be inside needing to be on a higher plane of nutrition, which will cost me more. It also increases the risk to calves. By turning calves out from anywhere from 2 days of age, it minimises the risk of scours and pneumonia spreading through the herd. I try and target the most sheltered, driest fields for turnout, because once cows and calves are out, that's it, they're out and they're not going to come back in. With that, we're also trying to get as tight a calving spread as we possibly can. This year I achieved a 95% 6-week calved rate, which coincides that when we started calving on the 1st of March, we have 95% of the herd calved by the end of the first rotation, which makes grassland management easier. Having a tighter calving pattern then allows cows that extra bit of time at grass before the bull goes in. So this year, from the last cow that calved to the bull going in, there was over a month, which gives her time to build back up her energy reserves, put on condition and start cycling again, which is all a cycle. So the better we manage our grass, the better our breeding performance. The better our breeding performance, the easier it is for us to manage our grass, and it all feeds into its cycle. Midsummer management on the farm then around grassland is all about managing grass quality. We're trying to keep the grass being grazed at around the 3-leaf stage. So in effective covers, that works out at around 14 to 1500 covers. We run 5 mobs on the farm. We have 2 groups of cows and calves, a group of bulling heifers, a group of bullocks for finishing, and we then have our beef heifers and cull cows running as another group. And having large numbers in fewer groups means it's easier to move cattle around, work through a field, get it grazed out and move on. So we're trying to keep around 21 days ahead, but on good growing conditions this can become shorter, but we're trying to make sure that it doesn't extend any further out than maybe 21 days. The other elements of summer grassland management that are important are graze outs and rotation length. We're targeting to try and get the cows to graze out to 4 centimetres to maintain quality throughout the summer period, and trying to keep our rotation length at around 21 days, but during dry weather we may need to extend that out to 25 or 26 days depending on growth rates. The farm here is 100% spring calving. We're aiming to finish all our stock as steers and heifers off grass the following season, between 18 and 22 months of age. Our average cow weight is 600 kilos, and we're aiming to try and wean as high a percentage of calf off those cows as possible. So last year our percentage calf weaned at 200 days off our cows was around 54% of the mature cow weight. The calves behind me here this year are averaging about 1.22 kilos of live weight gain from birth. Last year's cattle that are for finishing this year have been averaging 1 kilo of live weight gain since birth, and are well on track to be finished off grass this year. Autumn grassland management then moves on to focusing around closing up the farm to set us up for the following spring. I will manage my grassland and manage closing up. Generally I'll close up around mid-September to end of September, depending on growth rates and grass supplies. I will build covers through weaning cows and calves, so using my grass wedge and growth rates, I'll decide whether or not when cows can be weaned and prioritise grass for the calves at that stage. Cows will then be used, they'll be dried off, and depending on the weather will either be housed and fed on a low energy density ration then through until calving, or the preferred option would be is that they'll use to follow the calves to graze out residuals fully and maybe supplemented with hay or straw to just fill them up.
So some very interesting points made there with regard to management through the spring period, mid-season and autumn. We'll turn now to our panel again, and if you don't mind, I'll pose a few questions on the various areas. Sean, one of the things that jumped out at me watching that video was you mentioned the sort of overall breeding performance and that you have in your herd, and you had 95% of your cows calved in 6 weeks. as you mentioned at the very start, you're very, very much grass focused. In order to achieve that sort of a breeding target, how central is sort of grassland to achieving that?
Yeah, well, it's hugely important. So in springtime, we're targeting to get cows out on grass as early as we possibly can to get them onto a high plane of nutrition. If we get them onto a high plane of nutrition, they're milking well, so they're able to feed the calf, but it's feeding them to allow them to get back cycling again, and it's just a constant cycle then. So the better the cow's in condition, the more often she's cycling. When the bull, she eventually does go to the bull, she'll hold, so which means she'll then calve earlier, and it feeds on. So it's trying to give the cows as much opportunity early on to start cycling again to keep that compact calving going.
So really and truly, it's about condition, and you're gearing your system to get the cow to hit the ground running after she calves, regain all that weight she's lost after calving, so that she's in prime condition and likely to what I call it to go and calve either in first or second time of breeding, essentially.
Yeah.
And I suppose that has a lot of advantages from your perspective in terms of the overall labour efficiency on managing stock and that on the farm.
Yeah, well, if we have cows that have got back in calf earlier, it means that I'm focused then on them calving the following spring, but also when they calve earlier or when they get back in calf earlier, they start putting condition on earlier, which means the more condition they put on, then that is in essence winter feed for me that I can then take off that cow before she calves again. So it's building condition, getting them back in calf, and then actually creating winter forage.
One of the points that you actually made there was that you calve to grass and you turn them out and to stay out. But let's face it, this is Ireland. That doesn't always happen. Does it worry you, the fact that you would have to maybe bring them back in again?
No, it doesn't worry me. Like, they're targeted to go out onto the most sheltered paddocks. They are a good hardy breed that can take it, and they're good mothers, so they will look after their calves. But if they need to come back in, I know I've got good quality forage that they can go into, and once they come in, they're going to be going back out as soon as the weather allows again.
Okay, Eddie, turning to you in relation to this whole concept of turnout, I've seen down through the years, farmers, they have this notion that once the stock go out, they should stay out. And, we have a lot of inclement weather in the country, and as I say, in the springtime, that certainly doesn't always happen. Is there any research or any work done in Grange here to sort of suggest that cattle that are initially go out and have to come back in and are subsequently turned out, is there any disadvantage to the stock, or what are the findings?
In the long term, it's a win-win to go out to grass. Once the grass supply is there and the weather conditions are correct, you should go out. Sean has very clearly spelled out the benefits, let's say, in terms of suckler cows and their calves. Work that we have done with the growing stock, be the yearlings or replacement heifers or such things, has clearly shown that by going to grass early gives you benefit. And if there was no live weight gain advantage for the moment, what's happening is, if there wasn't, what's happening is, inside in the shed, basically animals are at best growing at a half a kilogram a day, and the reality is, and very often, they're not gaining half of that. Without fail, when those animals go to grass, there will be probably a live weight gain of 1 kilogram, 1.2, 1.3. So we're more than doubling or trebling the actual live weight gain at that stage. That's not the only issue. The other issue is that the cost of the gain at grass is much, much cheaper than live weight gain being got inside in the shed. Okay, so if nothing else was to happen other than go to grass early, we should not somehow see it as a failure if we have to come back in. Any day at grass we have is a day saving made. And by being at grass as well, you actually are saving on slurry being produced inside. So to me, and it happened, this has set me on a few occasions with farmers speaking to us, I can't go out and come back in. For heaven's sake, you take the advantage when it's there. When the weather is right, you go out. We don't know what tomorrow is like or next week. You take the opportunity when it's there, you go and you avail of it. Coming back in isn't a failure.
Okay, Krusty, just on that point, I mean, Eddie is basically saying, look, we should gear ourselves up to get out in the springtime, and even if we have to rehouse, so what? It's still better a extra day out than in. But from your own perspective, how important is it to have a spring plan at farm level in order to get that early turnout? And really, when does that need to start?
Yeah, it's very important to prepare. I mean, it starts the previous autumn. Essentially, if we think about it, the grass you're going to graze in the spring is grass that grew in late autumn. Winter growth is very, very, low. So it starts in the autumn, starting to shut off. And again, going back to the issue, if you have paddocks, when we say closing up, we'll say in early October, we're not saying close the whole farm, close a few paddocks. So again, the decisions are small. So you end up then with enough grass to graze early on. The big plus, I suppose, if we look at the last couple of seasons, weather often was good early in February and bad in March and April. So the silage that you haven't eaten by going out to grass in February is available there then if the weather turns and you have to go back in. Whereas if you stay in and you're eating that silage and then you come to March or April and you can't turn out because the weather is inclement. So as Eddie said earlier on, that bite you grab it when it's available and when you can. So the spring plan is important, but it's based on the autumn plan. The spring grass availability is that's planned for in the autumn.
Yeah, and I suppose as Eddie mentioned, that level of animal performance that you get off spring grass, I mean, realistically, it's rocket fuel compared to maybe mediocre silage plus a bit of concentrate that they're getting inside, because we often see that, that the cattle will do easily in excess of a kilo a day, particularly yearling cattle after they're turned out. And that the other point, Eddie, and it's an important factor with regard to spring management and the date that we actually turn out. But what's the policy here in Grange with regard to grazing the silage area? Do you graze it? Do you not? What's the pros and cons to that?
Very simply, all the farm is grazed for the first grazing cycle. So we obviously do our feed budget. Let's not go too deep into that right now. But the general plan will be that we'll start our rotation as soon as we can. We will aim to start our rotation on our silage area. But we'll say in our mind that come the 5th or 6th of April, we will have all the silage area grazed from the start to that date. And then we move off the silage area on to our grazing area. So we're saying that from the 6th of April on, where our feed budget is done, saying that we have sufficient grass available to maintain the stock that are out for the rest of that first half of the grazing season while the silage area is being closed. So as a rough rule, we'd say if we are here in this region, we'd say the first week in April is our sort of deadline. That means then that there are some silage fields maybe grazed in early to mid-March, and the last of them are grazed, let's say, in early April. So maybe the average grazing date is maybe the 3rd week in March. So that's what we do. What are the effects? If we graze in spring, we know that there's a small reduction in silage yield. But put simply, the earlier we graze in spring, the smaller is the yield reduction. The later we graze, maybe the bigger the reduction. On average, we find maybe a 10 to 12% reduction in silage yield. However, it's not all bad news. What we do have is that once we graze the silage area in spring, especially if the grass is relatively strong, we have an improvement in DMD. It's normally 2 or 3 units higher than DMD at any given date. So if we want to delay the cutting date by 2 or 3 units, we'll get all the yield back and have the quality as if it was never grazed, okay? So the reality is that it's a win-win. So we'll get outing early, and as Christy said, the silage that would now be fed inside in the yard is now being saved because they're out at grass for at least 3 weeks earlier. And as a rule, we would have got 3 extra weeks grazing by actually grazing the silage wards.
Okay, so look, a number of interesting points there with regard to spring management, but we can't sort of really underestimate the benefits to the animal and probably the benefits to the man in terms of financial benefits with regard to gearing the farm up and getting stock out early. And really, Christy, it seemed, or Sean, and you know this from using pasture base, getting out early is really about as much about confidence and having the information to say, I can get out, I can let X number of stock out, and I can do this, and this is going to work.
Yeah, well, pasture base gives you the ability to have a plan in place. Plans can change, and you can build flexibilities into your plans the whole time. So if the weather changes, the flexibility is there. But if you have eaten all your grass in the autumn time and then you're trying to turn cattle out, you have a very limited plan. And if you're not measuring, you have a limited plan. But if you have the setup, if you're set up to be able to get cattle out early and have the infrastructure and be able to subdivide fields down, you know, it's very easy to get out and utilise that grass early on.
And having that plan that you talked about, Christy, at least it gives you the option.
Yes.
Just if we move on, and time's sort of going against us here, but I want to move on a wee bit now to some of the points that were raised with regard to summer management. Sean, we're in sort of mid-season as such now. Lots of people thinking about taking second cuts of silage and that. But what do you see as the main priorities on your farm with regard to sort of grassland management for, say, the next 6 weeks?
Yeah, so the only thing I'm concerned about now at the moment is quality of my sward. If I have high quality grass in front of my cattle, they will put on weight, my cows will get back in calf, and my cows will perform well. So if I can keep quality in front of them, that's the most important thing. That's going to be done through taking out surplus paddocks, making sure cows are going into the right cover, grazing out paddocks.
And what sort of rotation length are you holding at the moment?
So we're up at about 21 days, but some paddocks we're going into as soon as 17 days. Growth at the moment is fantastic, so yes, we're right back down at 16, 17 days.
Okay. Eddie, again, you know, this has been a sort of unusual year with regard to grass growth. Things were sluggish enough early on, even very sluggish with regard to growth figures in part of May. And then suddenly in the last few weeks, particularly through June when we got the rain, there's an absolute surge. You know, how important is it, and what's the research telling us about getting on top of quality at this time of year? I mean, what's the payback in terms of, or what's the consequence if we don't get on top of it?
Okay, I think the challenge we have, okay, maybe in the first April and early May, we almost can't, in terms of animal performance, we can get it wrong. But we can get it wrong in terms of the grassland management. And as we come into late May, as grass starts to head out, and as you said, you know, there's a burst of growth over the last week or so after the rain, pastures can get ahead of us very, very quickly. And again, it's almost back to the point about having paddocks. You know, we can much easily see that by having paddocks, okay? But the challenge I see in it, and if we don't react to what we see in front of us, things can get away from us. And the challenge I see for farmers is to not to let the grass get away, take out the surplus, because if you try to keep grazing these big, strong covers, I'll call them almost silage fields, and many of them are, you are going to, first of all, probably penalise the animals, but the grass quality is going to go down. And it might not be there and then, but as sure as night follows day, once you come to September and October and as grass supply runs down, you're asking animals to graze into a butt, probably a dead butt, that's there from mid-season, and you cannot get performance in that.
Okay. Christy, how much of a management tool is the likes of topping, taking out round bales, adding extra to say second cut silage with regard to sort of getting on top of this whole quality issue?
I suppose we have a golden opportunity now. If we think of the first cut silages, yields are back maybe up to 20% or more in places. We now have a flush of growth. It's going to work out very well, because in order to control grass supply, we need to conserve it as bales or in the pit. So we're going to replenish some of the stocks that we need, while also keeping control of the grass. Topping, if you think about topping, that material is cut away and it's let die back. You know, if we grow extra grass by going through improving some element of fertility by growing paddocks or whatever, people have often said in the past, what are we going to do with all this surplus grass? We know what we could have done with it in 18, we could have done with it in the last month. You feed it, you bale it up, you save it, and unfortunately the way the weather and climate has gone now, an opportunity will arise to feed that shortly. So there's a golden opportunity now to replenish some of the supplies that are short, but also it's a win-win in the sense that we can control grass quality, as Sean has taken out surplus grass. So, you know, encourage that surplus to continue. Let's take it out, and it'll keep grass quality correct.
In terms of the lighter stock farms, is there a case there that if they were to manage grass quality correctly and they could actually take a lot of their silage requirement out as in the form of surplus grass, as opposed to maybe having huge areas sort of closed up early on in the season?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And you know, you'll pull your costs back there, and you'll be getting better quality material as well, and you'll be keeping the grass quality right along during the season. Now, when you finish your cut at the end of May or early June, and you're going to have a lot of land under those animals there. Whereas if you just you take more of it out as you go along during the summer in smaller bites rather than one large bite, it'll be really a strong aid to grassland management there.
So really and truly, what we're saying is that the last few weeks should have been focused and will continue to remain focused on trying to keep quality ahead of stock for the remainder of the year. Just in relation to autumn management, Sean, you mentioned there that you possibly started to close up in mid-September, and that would that be a wee bit early for the east of the country, or is that when you're starting to build grass covers?
Yeah, so it's more so about when I'm starting to build covers. I'll typically sort of mid-September onwards start to wean cows and calves, and when I've weaned cows and calves, it allows me to almost build some covers up that could be taken out then by dry cows. They don't need the quality at that period of time, but I can reduce my winter costs if I can keep them out grazing slightly heavier covers. So it just allows me to do that.
One of the important aspects that came through in relation to the autumn close-up was that, we close in rotation. We don't go into the winter maybe with too heavy a covers, although we want to create a bit of a wedge. Christy, in the west of Ireland for the last couple of years, particularly in the autumn time, we've had very wet Septembers, Octobers, and it just physically hasn't been possible for lots of farmers to clean out those covers. What are the options for those lads? I mean, you don't want to be going into the winter with, 1,500-1,600 kilograms of cover in the month of October.
Yes, I mean, particularly if you mentioned the west, there's a high population of sheep in the west of Ireland there. They will be, they'll have low ground pressure there. They could be used, and it could be a small income stream for the beef farmer there to clean out those heavy covers, with the proviso that there's an entry date and a date when they leave, so that you don't continue on into Christmas with those paddocks and with those sheep. And if there's some that you cannot reach, obviously they're going to be a target to get out first in the spring to clean off those covers, to actually reset the grass and encourage growth. And I suppose what I meant to mention earlier on was, by getting out early and taking off those covers that have been grown over the winter, you're really going to rejuvenate the grass. You're going to wake it from its slumber, and it's going to start to regrow then. So there's some of the ways maybe that the surplus in the autumn can be handled.
Okay, one of the questions that came in here, Eddie, actually, and thank you for sending your questions in. Eddie, there's a question came in here with regard to the quality of autumn grass in terms of for store cattle or finished cattle. Is there any difference in terms of the quality or the feed value of the grass as we go into the autumn? And if so, what sort of level of supplementation or what type of supplementation would you typically be talking about? And I know you've done research on that.
So as a general rule, once we come to September or so, we begin to see maybe the quality of grass, the feeding value, even though it might be leafy, tending to fall away. However, and I would say in that situation, that grass per se is probably sufficient to meet the requirement of the animals, even though it might be a bit poorer than early in the season. As long as grass supply is adequate, one will be slow to talk about feeding concentrates at pasture, okay? And the only where I would maybe consider feeding concentrates at pasture, first of all, if there's no grass, you have to do something about it. That's a different question. But if grass supply, is limited, or if there's cattle who are getting close to finish, maybe they're 30 to 40 kilograms from the end, you might say maybe at some stage in September, maybe in August, you might begin to introduce meal to try to finish them off pasture, but they're getting close to finish when you're doing that. The work that we've done here at Grange would suggest that any animals that are planned to go indoors for finishing, that really there's little or no point to feed them at pasture. The best thing is to keep them at pasture for as long as you can, then go in and finish inside, rather than trying to straddle both.
Okay. Another question, and it goes back to a point that you made, Sean, earlier, is that you specifically grow red clover silage to feed weedlings and to feed finishing stock. The question has basically come in, what sort of is your experience of red clover? Can you explain how you manage it and how you keep it in the sward? Yeah,
so red clover is, I suppose, in essence, it's my pride and joy. It's the high quality, producing high quality high 80 DMD silage, high protein that is going to be there to grow those cattle out. I suppose from a management perspective, it's about taking care of it. You know, it is my pride and joy, treat it as such. So that means don't go out and abuse it early in springtime. If you need to graze it, make sure the weather is dry. If you're going out to cut it, try and again cut it in the dry as much as you possibly can, or just limit the amount of heavy machinery that's going out on it. And then it's about soil fertility again. You know, you need to feed it. It doesn't need nitrogen. You can grow a lot. It'll fix a lot of its own nitrogen, but it needs its P's and K's. So, you know, going back out with the slurry and topping up what might be a deficit if it's needed to be on top of that slurry. But as long as you treat it with a bit of respect and give it the feed that it needs, you can get upwards of 5-6 years out of that.
You were saying that you were getting up to 14 tonnes dry matter per hectare.
Yeah, so last year's yield was 14.5 tonne of dry matter a hectare.
As a follow-on to that, Eddie, one of the points of this whole week is about sustainability in beef. There is some indications that coming down the tracks that we're going to be asked to maybe incorporate more clover in our swards as a way of maybe reducing their sort of chemical nitrogen input as such. But you know, would you concur with the point that Sean made? I mean, about how important soil fertility is if we're going to try and establish clover?
Oh, absolutely. I think it is one of the key corner blocks that we're going to talk about, or should do. If we're going to get clover into our pastures, there may be a challenge to incorporate it. And then we're talking about beef farmers, so most of the pastures are permanent. So the challenge is, how do we get it in maybe without reseeding? Even though reseeding is obviously the clear, easiest way to do it. Whatever challenge we have of getting it in there, maintaining it there, if the soil is low pH, so it's acidic, certainly that's going to make the persistence of clover a real challenge. So I would have said, as we said in the very beginning, if we're going to do anything with our pastures, and especially for clover, the soil pH has to be corrected, okay? So that's where back to where we started from. The soil pH must be right, and as Sean said, you know, the P and the K are important.
One question that has come in here from Joe in Wicklow, and I'll direct this to you, Christy, is why should we use a combination fertiliser types rather than one compound? And I know Sean mentioned that, you know, and as part of the Teagasc MAC curve in terms of mitigating against emissions, that he's using protected urea. So, I mean, what would you say to Joe?
Okay, I suppose there's a number of factors. If phosphorus is an issue on the farm, we know that there isn't any urea or protected urea-based compounds with phosphorus in them. So obviously, if we want to try and maximise the use of protected urea, we put it in a situation where you need nitrogen, you need potassium, and it contains sulphur. And otherwise then, if there's phosphorus needed, then you might have to go in directly with straight phosphorus. So it'll be very much farm specific, you know, and it will be, you know, the times have changed now, and we have a lot of, you know, protected urea compounds in, and we need to find places where, you know, we can maximise the benefits of protected urea. So it's very much farm specific, but again, that's the complexity of the issue, in that if you need to get phosphorus in and you also want to get in use protected urea, you end up having to maybe go with something like a straight P.
Maybe to make the point, Aidan, if Joe is interested in looking at the programme that was broadcast last night, there was an entire section given over to the whole idea of explaining protected urea and its ability to reduce emissions. So if he's interested in that, he might just look in and see that programme from last night.
Okay, thanks for that, Eddie. And I mean, look, there's lots of very good material has been put out this week, a huge effort by Teagasc staff to get lots of information there. It's up there on the web that you can access at any time. You obviously don't have to watch it live like we are tonight. It can be accessed at any time. One very quick question, Christy, and it's a bugbear of mine. I see lads spending lots of money year on year, and they tell you, I have to reseed. And two or 3 years down the track, they've spent all this money, and the field has reverted back to the grass types that were there before they set the plough or before they tilled it at all. Give me your take on that, and you need to be brief because the clock, as I say, is going to beat me here.
Okay. First of all, you know, if you're going to reseed, you're putting in a very high yielding grass. So if you haven't been feeding the grass adequately, it's in there already with, you know, adequate nitrogen, phosphorus and potash, there isn't any point in going in and reseeding. First thing I would look at on a farm and see is there additional grass growth required here? Is there somewhere else that I can spend that equivalent to that 300 an acre on the area that's been reseeded, when I know it's only going to get 30 or 40 units of nitrogen. It's not going to last. So I agree with you. There's a place for reseeding, where there's a high levels of stocking rate, and you can get the benefit out of those top-end varieties of grass. But if you're not going to feed it or not going to have a demand for grass, I don't think it's a role to play on some farms. Work with what you have, but certainly on the higher stocked farms, it's an absolute requirement. Yeah.
Okay, listen, thank you very much to all my panel members. This has actually literally flew through as far as I'm concerned, and we could certainly ask a lot more questions. Thank you, the audience, for sending in your questions. It's a topic that we possibly will have to revisit again. But, there was a couple of very good points raised here today. Soil testing, correcting pH, first steps in terms of if we want or need to grow more grass, and then we can address the P and K issues. Small steps with regard to improving grazing infrastructure, and then we're looking at, you need a plan if you're going to turn out early in the springtime. It's all about quality mid-season, and again, we need to close up on rotation in the autumn time, and have a sort of a plan as to how that's going to happen, set our dates, all hugely important. The other thing that has struck me over the course of the week, and it's, Sean has brought it to light here tonight, suckler cows and the suckler cow system is predominantly a forage-based system where we manipulate the condition of the cow. Grass, managed well, can do that and make it cost effective. We had Nicky Byrne on Tuesday talking about the dairy calf to beef systems, and two of the points that he made were very, very interesting. He said the most profitable dairy calf to beef systems were based on slaughtering at younger ages and where they could maximise the amount of forage in the diet, grass and good quality grass silage. Two key points. So look, as I said at the very start, we have the potential in this country to grow lots of grass. We need to sharpen up when it comes to utilisation and getting the most out of it, because it is sustainable and it has a hell of a lot to offer us in terms of the economics and in terms of the image and in terms of the nutritive value of the beef that we're producing. So we can't ignore that. To finish up, I suppose I want to thank everybody. As I said, thank you very much to our panel. I also want to thank our Martin Marcin and the production team. I want to thank Declan McArdle, who's been a huge help in the last few weeks in the preparation for this. Two of my colleagues who set the agenda for today, Catherine Egan and Dr. Mark McGee. Thanks to their help. We've got a very, very dynamic PR department within Teagasc, which has helped us along the way. We mentioned Pasture Base Ireland, which is a huge resource for you as farmers. And the other is we have a very, very innovative Grass 10 programme, which is delivering very, very good results, and a fantastic team on the ground there, and we thank them. Can I thank all my colleagues, the advisors on the ground who contributed to all our social media posts throughout the day. Just as a reminder to you, we're moving towards our final day of our virtual beef week in Teagasc tomorrow. And tomorrow morning at 12 o'clock, we've got our midday beef tech talk, which will look at the economics of suckler cow production and dairy calf to beef systems. And then in the evening, we're actually looking at the challenges that are facing the beef sector for the next number of years. And we've got a very high profile lineup of speakers there. We've got our own director, Professor Jerry Boyle. We've got Tim Cullinan, the new president of the IFA. We've got the new Minister for Agriculture, Barry Cowan, and we have Mairead McGuinness, MEP, who will give us hopefully a bit of insight as to what direction the CAP is going to go. So hopefully you'll be available to tune into that. And as again, thank you for joining, and hope you've got something out of tonight's broadcast. Thank you.